questions, you can raise your hand or enter the question at the chat down there at the bottom as well. I was going to go through a few PowerPoint slides to talk a little bit about me, a little bit about a little bit about Fastpath, and then we'll go through some ways to setting up security in a best practice way, and then also making sure that that's going to make it easier for you to go through your audit. And then we'll also take a look at some of the Fastpath tools that really help you with your audit in Intacct. So with that, I don't if there aren't any other questions before we get started. Trish, are you recording? Oh, yep, it says this session is being recorded, so I take that as a yes. So we'll get started here. So again, my name is Andy Snook, and I work in the development center at Fastpath. We are a software company that builds tools around security, audit, compliance. So what we're going to talk about today is I'll introduce myself, the company. We'll talk about common challenges that most organizations face if you fall under any sort of regulatory compliance, whether it's SOX, FDA. There are all sorts of other regulatory compliance. They've probably approved 3 other compliance standards while we've been talking just in the last 3 minutes. So it's an issue and a challenge facing everyone today. We'll talk specifically about access reviews and the challenge around access reviews. We'll talk around segregation of duties and some methodologies and some tips and tricks about segregation of duties, and then we'll also talk about continuous monitoring in audit trails so you can better understand who's been changing data within the system. So a little bit about me. I'm the president and founder of Fastpath. I'm certified in risk and information systems control. I've been working with financial management systems for the past 17 years. So from tools like Intacct to doing SAP implementations to QuickBooks, I've spanned a lot of different size of implementations, from a 2-user implementation all the way up to a 20,000 user implementation, project management experience in the ERPs, and then I have 10 years of experience in auditing ERP systems specifically. So a lot of background both in the ERP systems as well as security and audit with that. So our company was founded in 2004 really specifically to help companies with compliance. So at the time in 2004, if you had SAP, there were tools built into SAP to help maintain risk, manage risk in SAP, but for anyone else, it was just left to manual or using Excel to try to understand who has access, build the access within the tool. And so we basically built a methodology and a platform that would work with any system. So not just germane to SAP, that we could use it with anything. And so we partnered with Intacct to deliver our methodologies and our tool sets specifically for Intacct. So it's been a great partnership so far. We're very excited to be in the Intacct community. It's been great with working with the team. And so today we'll talk a little bit about how that integration works and how we've brought those methodologies that we developed in 2004, how we've pushed those out for the Intacct tools here this year. So our headquarters are in Des Moines, Iowa. Our staff includes CPAs and certified internal auditors, former SOX auditors on staff. So not only do we have great applications that'll help, we also have a team behind it that understands the challenges that you're going through. You'll also see a lot of templates in our tool set. So things like, from a segregation of duties perspective, we've already built a standard SOD rule set specifically for Intacct. So that if you would, generally at a business level, a vendor, someone should be able to create a vendor and create a purchase order. We've already mapped that down to Intacct, and that comes with the tool set. So it's nice to have that team behind it that understands the challenges, understands the best practice. We have over 1,000 customers in over 30 countries, and we're recognized as an industry leader by the Institute of Internal Auditors as well. So these are some of our clients. The reason this slide is here is really to show that we go risk management, security, and audit go across industry, right? So whether you're a process manufacturer, whether you're a financial services company, whether you're selling mascara, wrestling, or mattresses, whatever it may be, risk management is important, and securing your data is important. You know, there are several, pick up the newspaper today and you can look at several stories about companies having their data compromised, like probably the most famous one currently would be the Sony, what's going on with Sony right now. So it's very important regardless of the organization, regardless of size. So some of these implementations are multinational across thousands of users, and some of these implementations are one site here in the U.S. and they only have 10 users in their ERP system. So again, we work across various industries, we work across various sizes of clients, and we're able to help them with the security, audit, and risk management. We also work with a lot of the audit firms. We have a very great partnership with Armanino, for example, where we partner with their team not only from an implementation perspective, but also from a GRC or a risk management perspective. So they use our tools when they're setting up Intacct. They use our tools when they're helping companies prepare to be audited when they're using Intacct, and then they would help a company as they go through that audit. If you don't see your audit firm here, it doesn't mean that we don't work with them. It just means that we don't have that agreement to put their logo on our slide deck. But we work with a lot of these firms in various capacities, and we work together and partner together. The reason they're called Audit Partners is to build and improve the methodologies, the rule sets, and everything to help that push down to our customers and to our partners like Intacct as well to push that functionality and best practice down. So what I wanted to talk about first was what we see challenges at a lot of the client sites we run into. And so many of these challenges may sound familiar to some of the people on the call today, and some of this is just kind of making sure that you don't feel like you're the only one. Probably every bullet on this slide, we get this call once a week, at least once a month, with somebody saying, this is the situation I'm in, please help me. So a lot of times people feel like a little bit embarrassed that they're the only company that has that challenge, and it's really not the case. So one of the main things we see at our clients is that access security is a low priority for the project team. And what I mean by project team is the implementation team. And so when you go to implement Intacct, it's a great product, right? It's an awesome ERP. It has a ton of great features to it. And usually there's so many neat features versus some of the other ERPs out there that you get focused on those features. And so you think about the purchasing and workflow and all those things that are great, and you kind of leave application security because it's not very exciting, right? It just isn't really sexy. So at the very end, somebody says, oh, by the way, you need to set up all the users and give them access. Well, when that happens, a lot of times people are just given access to everything. You go live, and everybody's basically just set up as the system administrator, and they do anything they want. So, yeah, you're live, and people are using the software, but is that accurate? Access, secured your environment. So it can be a low priority because during the implementation, the main priority is processing transactions. And so we see that all the time. Another challenge we see for our clients are that process controls are not part of the consideration of their ERP implementation. And this is almost like the opposite problem of no security at all, which the first bullet was, right? This is that you lock everything down so much that you start to impact productivity, that a person can't create a vendor and create a purchase order and create a account, create a journal entry, and people get so granular with their security they forget that they have other controls outside of Intacct that can really help them. I don't need to lock everybody out of creating a vendor and printing a check because we use positive pay with our bank. So if I can grant users more access within Intacct, then I can be more productive and then still mitigate that risk through monthly journal entry reconciliation or positive pay or some other sign-off or maybe physical security outside of the application. So people tend to ignore that they have other controls in place beyond the application security. Security design is the domain of the IT system admin team, and the business isn't aware. And what this means is that the IT team knows how to flip all the switches, in Intacct to turn security on and off, or maybe you have a consultant that does all that for you, but really the business process owners really don't understand what that impact that has or what that means. And the problem with that is that the business process owners know security requirements better than anyone else. If I'm a purchasing manager, I want to know who has access to create purchase orders, and not only that, I have a pretty good idea of who should and shouldn't be creating those purchase orders. So what I should be able to do is design the security, and the IT team is really just responding to my request to say these are the people that should have access to the purchase orders, instead of letting the IT team just kind of pick and choose what they want. So we see that a lot. There's really no dialogue between the business owners in the challenge to cycle 5, right? The new AP clerk, that AP clerk sits down for the first day of work, and they don't have access to create vendors or enter invoices, and now you have a manager on the phone with the IT department, very frustrated and trying to get that access right away. Typically what IT people do is just grant them as much access, not to make it right, not to enable the person to do their job, but they enable enough access to make the fire drill go away. And a lot of times what that ends up being is you see people over-granting security because they don't really understand the requirements. So again, it's a challenge because those teams don't work together. I know that in a lot of the smaller environments, people might end up being, hey, look, I'm the controller, I'm the business process owner, and I'm the admin. I'd love to have an IT admin help us. And that presents different challenges. But this challenge is really when you have that admin team, and it's a challenge to work together because they don't understand the business. No ongoing monitoring of process controls, which means we've implemented all these great process controls, audit trail, workflow, positive pay with the bank, but you spend a ton of time implementing those process controls, but no one ever goes back and checks to see if they're working, if they're still enabled, if they're still, if somebody actually reviewing those reports, right? So it's kind of, I always make the analogy that this is like going out and planting this wonderful rose garden and then never going back and weeding it, right? And if you don't ever go back and look at it, it gets pretty ugly. And so this is one of those things that you don't monitor the process controls. Is it really an effective control if you're not paying attention? And really what you did is just essentially wasted a lot of time setting it up in the first place. No consideration of segregation of duties. Segregation of duties right now is a really hot topic with audit firms. It's a really hot topic with the oversight board, which means it's going to be a really hot topic at each company. And segregation of duties is hard, and it's a challenge, and especially if you're a smaller mid-sized company, it's an even bigger challenge. How am I supposed to demonstrate and have effective segregation of duties controls when I have one person in my AP department, right? That's very difficult. That, or even two people. Nobody gets to go on maternity leave. Nobody gets to go on vacation. How does that work? And so a lot of times what we've seen from companies is they say, we're too small for that, or it's too complicated. Well, auditors aren't accepting that as an answer anymore. And so the security is set up in the system without a consideration of segregation of duties, and then there's no segregation of duties testing at all, and then when you go through the audit, you have an issue. Outside of just passing the audit, you have an issue because you're opening yourself up to fraud, you're opening yourself up to misstatement of financials. There's a lot of other associated risk there. So again, it's thinking through segregation of duties before you set up the security or as you're setting up the security. If we're going to give all of our AP clerks the ability to create a vendor and issue a payment, well, where's our control there? How do I know that that AP clerk doesn't create a vendor called cash, write a check to himself, and walk down the street to 7-Eleven? Where's my control? So that consideration is a challenge for a lot of people as they start to set up their security in the application. And if you can consider that up front and then you deploy the security, it makes it much easier to test it, and it makes it much easier once you go through the audit. Dilution of the go-live security. This goes back to the fire drill scenario. that if you did a really great job during your implementation, you have a fantastic Intacct partner that helped you set up the security, you made a lot of investment in it, but then every time the purchasing manager calls with a fire drill and says, this person needs access right now, and you start changing the access, you've diluted that design that you implemented, because and if you never go back and change it, right, the overgrown garden again, you never go back and weed it, you're going to have issues. Pretty soon, by the end, everybody either has their own role, or everybody has their own access, or everybody just eventually becomes the admin because it makes all of the questions go away. No more fire drills if everyone's the admin. And a lot of times that's how IT people think. They don't necessarily I'm not trying to talk bad about IT people, but the thing is a lot of IT people are incented to close help desk tickets. They get a performance review, and they get a bonus if the faster and more help desk tickets they close, right? So if I can make sure that I never get another help desk ticket, that's great, right? So if I give everybody access, they're not considering the financial risk, and your IT people may not understand finances and segregation of duties and misstatement of financials, but that's not really their job. So you have to work together as a team to make sure that they understand that. And then the inability to report on the current security setup in an efficient manner, right? That people have challenges to say, how do I know who can close a fiscal period? How do I know who can print checks? How do I know where my risks are in that access? And then a lot of times people implement expensive customizations instead of the standard security and control features in Intacct, in the ERP, in their environment. They spend a lot of time designing and a lot of money implementing other custom things instead of just using, building a plan, executing the plan, and then consistently weeding the garden, right? Making sure that they go back and understand that it's all there. So these are the challenges that we typically see at most client sites. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is I will show some of the Fastpath tools, but the goal of any session that I do is that you would be able to take something away at your own organization, whether you use our tools or not, right? So what we're going to talk about is some methodologies to help you get through this. How can I make setting up security easy? What should my considerations be when I'm setting up security? So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. So you'll hear me say this again and again today, is take a risk-based approach. And that's the best thing you can do before you even start to set up security, is understand your organization and understand where your risks are as an organization. And what I mean by that is, if you take a company like Heineken, right, a lot of Heineken's risks are at an inventory level, right? A lot of people find Heineken's inventory very valuable. It's afternoon here in Iowa, so maybe after the session I'll have myself a Heineken. But the idea is that they know that that's a high risk because people find their inventory, the beer, valuable. So they put a lot of controls around the handling of that inventory. So it could be physical controls like locking down the warehouse, cameras in the warehouse, understanding what goes on the truck and making sure when it gets to the other warehouse the same amount comes off of that truck, things of that nature, where other organizations like a finance organization, they don't have physical inventory. So their risks might be around handling of cash and payments and things of that nature versus Heineken and having the physical inventory. So the first thing to do is really understand your business, right, and identify your high-risk business processes. So take Intacct out of the equation. Just think about your own company and think about, am I like Heineken? Do we have inventory? Where are our risks as an organization? Accepting credit cards, storing credit cards, handling product, whatever it may be, and start to document what those high-risk business processes are. The other thing that will be very helpful is mapping out those business processes. So do a business process mapping so you understand each step in the process, right? So you understand that this is what it takes to create a vendor at our organization. And you say each role, each AP clerk, the AP manager, the controller, this is the role that they play in creating a vendor. So as you build those processes out, you can start to base your application security and documentation on those maps. You can say, in order to be an AP clerk, at Fastpath, I need to be able to do all these processes, and those processes map down to Intacct here. So this is the activity, the list, or the report that I need access to within Intacct in order to create a vendor. And I can go back to my business process map to see that as an AP clerk, I need access to that. So now you're starting to document the understanding, and it becomes very clear not only to the business process owner what's required, but it becomes very clear to the IT team what's required for that role, that access for that individual. So you can start to determine the functionality required for the high-risk processes, and then you can also start in those business process maps to define where the risks are. So if you only have one AP clerk and that AP clerk can perform all those functions, that's a pretty high risk. And maybe you already use positive pay with your bank, and you can say that's our mitigation. Or you realize we don't have a mitigation and this is a high risk, and you can start to say, let's start to build a mitigation, or maybe we need to start changing the security to start mitigating that risk. So as you go through those maps, you're identifying who's involved in the process, what are the steps in the process, how those steps apply to Intacct, how Intacct applies to the security, and figuring out where the risks are in that security. You're now starting to see that those maps are the baseline for your application security, as well as your segregation of duties risks, as well as your reviews when it comes for the audit time. So again, and if you'd like to see an example of a business process that we have mapped out, you can contact us. I'll put my contact information back up there, and you can get a copy of one of those maps. And we do sessions periodically. If you've never done one before, we'll teach you how to do those. I know there are several Intacct implementation partners that can help you build those as well. But if you want to see an example of one of those, we'll definitely be able to provide that to you. So once you define your risks, then what you want to start to do is define the reviews. When am I going to review, is positive pay in place? When am I going to define a review of maintaining product pricing for our beer in our warehouse is a high risk? So somebody needs to review all price changes to the beer on a weekly basis. So now you've identified the risk. You've identified that somebody's going to review it. Now you need to identify the person that's going to review it, and then the periodicity with which they'll review that, right? So somebody's going to review, Tom is going to review that on a weekly basis, the inventory pricing changes. And now from an audit perspective, once you've defined that, is you want to make sure that you're able to provide evidence that that review was done. So being able to say, our control was that Tom was going to review the changes to pricing on a weekly basis. Here's the sign off on all those reports. Or Tom was going to review the person that had the access to make pricing changes on a weekly or monthly or quarterly basis, and here's the evidence. One of the other mistakes we see a lot of our customers making is, and a lot of people assume that the auditors want to see who has access to the system. They want to look at who has access. They don't necessarily want to know who has access to your system. They want to know that you know and that you've been looking at the access to the system, or that you've been looking at the changes and so on. So if you can provide that evidence to them, that helps. The other thing that you've done just on this one slide of going through the business process maps, you've helped with security, you've helped with the segregation of duties risks, you've defined your reviews, you've defined also a roadmap for the auditors. You're starting to build a control catalog internally to say, as our business processes relate to Intacct, these are all the reviews that we do. We review vendors, changes to vendors. We review segregation of duties. And when you hand that to an auditor, they have confidence that you know what you're doing. And they also, we presented with PwC about a year ago, a lot of their clients start to be able to negotiate their audit fees because it takes less time for the auditors to learn up front what your processes and controls are. So these maps and this approach are going to supplement your narratives. And a lot of audit firms are requiring might be a hard word, but they want their customers, they would prefer that their clients do the business process maps instead of the standard, Word document narratives. So this is a huge step forward for a lot of organizations. If you can start here, and one of the things I would say is start with one process. Start with maintaining a vendor. Start with order entry. Start with one process and go through it. You don't have to do every single business process at first. And pick the highest risk process in your organization, start there, and then move on from there. Because at small and mid-sized organizations, you may not have the time or the team to do all of this, right? And auditors do actually understand that, but you say, we've decided because we have inventory, we decided that we wanted to understand the inventory processing the best because that's the highest risk. So this is an example of the process. Again, we can send this to you so you can see the customer. This is an order entry process. The customer salesperson, it's called a swim lane. You can see all the roles down the side. You can see the different systems. So the customer, the customer places the order. Is this order from the web? No. Enter the form into and make a contract. So again, we can send you a sample of that order process. But that's going to drive that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through, oversimplified, the 3 key areas to know from a security and a risk and audit perspective. And if you can answer these 3 questions, you're ahead of the majority of the world, a lot of the people that come to us straight away. If you can understand easily or review who has access to Intacct, right, and answer that question. Do you know who has access to the system? Do you know where the risks are in that access? And do you know what changes were made with that access? You're well ahead of the game. And so if you can do those 3 things, and I'll walk you through how to do those, and I'll walk you through how to very easily do it with the Fastpath tools. But those are really 3 key questions that, no matter what ERP you use, those 3 questions are critical to the risk management. So the first one we're going to talk about is application security. Just flat out, who has access? Who are the users in your system, and what access do they have? And again, there's that take a risk-based approach comment again. What we want to do is take a risk-based approach. I'm an auditor. When I go into an organization, I don't ask, what does Homer Simpson have access to? I don't want to know what a specific user has access to. I don't want to know what a role has access to. I don't come in and say, show me what an AP clerk has access to. I ask questions based on risk of functionality. Who can close a fiscal period? Who can create a purchase order? Who can maintain configuration settings? Things of that nature. So really what you're doing is you're analyzing security by function, not by user. Right? So you're going to look at a high-risk function. And so Intacct has hundreds of access points, but there are probably only 20 or 30, maybe 40 access points that are high risk. Right? So there might be something that Intacct just needs, you need access just to process something, right? Or you just need access to that window because it's a lookup window, but you can't enter a transaction, you can't maintain master data, you're not impacting the financials from those access points. They're just required because it's a piece of software. And so if you're reporting, if you run a user access report and you include all of those low or negligible risk items, you're having to review and sift through all those. And so one of the things that, and as an example, these are typically, these are things that auditors see as high risk or organizations see as high risk. Customers, vendors, inventory, pricing. Can you write a credit memo? Can you maintain configuration settings? Can you change security, fiscal periods? So these are the 20 to 30 high-risk areas in most ERPs, whether you're, the size of Coca-Cola using SAP, or if you're a 2-person company just using Excel to track things. These are the things we want to know, who can do these things at your organization. And so out of the box, Intacct has some access reports, and then we've partnered with Intacct to offer some advanced functionality in understanding who has access. So if I flip over to my server here, this is our GRC Studio tool. It integrates with Intacct. It sits outside of Intacct. It's an Outlook style interface. We have our different modules down the left-hand side, the ribbons across the top. But if I want to go to, here's a place called user access, I can pick a product. And so you can go across multiple products here. So we're adding Salesforce, Zora to our product offerings as well. So if you use those in concert with Intacct, those will be available soon for you to see as well. I want to look at an object type, which in Intacct would be an activity list or report. I want to look at a company, and then if I drop down here, if I want to look, I think I picked an object type there. There we go. If I want to look, I want to know who has access to general ledger master data. So I can just pick general ledger master data, and I want to look across all of the users in my system. So when we're connecting to your Intacct environment, we're only going to show you what's set up in your system. If I hit go here, it's going to go out, look at security across all of the users, all of their, if you're using the role security, it's going to look across roles. If you've assigned it directly to user, it's going to see that as well. And it brings back a list of the users that have access to accounts. And so here you can see the admin has access to accounts, add, edit, view. And if you want to narrow that down, I could say I only want to see the people that can add accounts. So there are 4 users that are able to add accounts within the system. It's high risk. We're now taking a risk-based approach. But I mentioned there are 20, 30, 40 high-risk access points. So am I going to sit here and do this 40 different times? We've actually provided the functionality and some templates for what we call critical access groups. And so here I have a group called Demo. And down the left-hand side, this is showing you every single access point within Intacct. And on the right-hand side are the ones that we've picked out as high risk for our organization. Vendors, configuration settings, who can enter orders, who can maintain items, who can post journal entries. And so what we're doing is narrowing down your access review just to those key access points. And you can also create as many, and this is a template group that's available to you. You can also enter your own groups. So if you want to enter a group just for the finance team and have your controller review security for her department, you can do that. And so in finance, it would add bank details, checkbook details, general ledger, fiscal periods. And then under purchasing, you'd have your purchasing manager. He would analyze security for vendors, purchase orders, receivings, pricing, things of that nature. So you can start to break it up by business process owner, which does a few things. One, they should know the security requirements better than anyone else. And 2, you've distributed your workload, so it's not just up to one person to review security every month or quarter. It's everyone's doing it, and it's easier because they have a smaller report to review. So basically what we do once we have that group built is we can go to the critical access place within the tool. I can pick the group that I built there called Demo. I can hit Go, and it's going to show us who has access to those high-risk areas within the system. I can also group any of the columns. So if I wanted to group by user ID and I wanted to see what I have access to within the system, it's very easy to do that. You can export to PDF, to Excel, really lots of different files there. You can print hard copies. You can save filters out. If you want to filter it down and save that out for future use, you can do that. Or as I mentioned, if this is the report that a lot of our customers use to do their monthly or periodic access reviews for their audit, you can sign off on this report, right? I mentioned that it's not necessary. The auditors want to know that you've been reviewing security. I click on Sign Report. It brings up the report title, the user, the date, and I can enter any notes here. So I've approved that. I reviewed it and approved it. And then there's a signature log within the tool that will show you every time a user reviewed a report and every time a user signed off on that report. And again, now you can go back to the auditor to say, we review security by department on a monthly basis, and here's the evidence that the security was reviewed by the business process owner on the first of the month, every single month. And so it makes it very easy to look at that security. There are also a lot of standard reports, just like users, which users are in the system. We have some role reports, some other information as well. But these are really the key items in terms of reviewing security in Intacct and making it easy going forward. you can also schedule these reports, like if you do wanted your users to review it on the 1st of every month, I can click Add to Schedule here. This is my critical access report. I want to add that to a schedule. I want to email that as a PDF or an Excel sheet to Alex and to Mike on the 1st of every month. So monthly, the 1st of every month, and it's going to start the 1st of the year. This is going to be our new review. There's no end date. And now every single month, they're going to get an email with a PDF attached to it for that report. So it's a great way to push those reviews out to the end users, get them the right data at the right time, and it makes it easier for them to do those reviews. So if I go back, so that's how we review the access. And again, this is also a great way to review access and do acceptance testing when you're implementing security. So when you are going through that initial implementation of Intacct, you can, as you're building your security, you have the business process owners reviewing, yeah, I'm the purchasing manager, and the only people that should be able to create purchase orders are in the purchasing department and the HR person because they order office supplies. And that's it. And they can very easily see that these are the only users that have access to that. So if I jump back here to our deck, you're going to take that risk-based approach. Oops, I went down there. Go back to the previous slide there. So you're going to understand, the last thing you want to do is understand the administrative access. Understand who's the admins in your system, and that's a question that any auditor will ask. And we have reports out of the box in our tool that will show these are the users that have been set up for admin. And so being able to say, not only being able to say these are who's set up as admin, but explaining why. Why does that user need administrative access? And auditors, if you have an explanation, they're actually rather reasonable that they understand that you need an administrator. They set up the users. They set up other items. They have to control the configuration settings. Somebody has to have the keys to the kingdom. But if you have other users that are set up as admin and there's no good reason for them to be an admin, the auditors are going to start asking questions. So review who's been set up as an admin type user and then be able to explain why that user has the administrative access. So the next piece is the segregation of duties piece. Anytime you're doing segregation of duties, there's always a balance between a preventative control, right, meaning that you're going to block a user from performing a function, and productivity. And what I mean by that is that, you know, we can lock every single user out of all the functions in Intacct, but we're never going to get anything done. It's really secure because no one can do anything. But we have to get work done on a daily basis. We need to process those transactions, but we want to identify those risks. The other challenge here in small to mid-sized companies is that you don't have the human capital like somebody the size of GE to say that in our payables process, we have one person creates the vendor, the other person creates an invoice, yet another person prints the check, somebody else puts it in the envelope, somebody else licks the stamp and you get it. We only have 2 people. So how are we supposed to manage that? And it gets to be a challenge. So preventative controls are great, but sometimes that's impossible when you're in a smaller environment. So it's that balance. And so our methodology, a Fastpath methodology, is a detective methodology. So we're not blocking any users in Intacct from performing a function, right? We're not going to say, if you've created this vendor, you shouldn't be able to create a purchase order for that vendor, or if you can create vendors, you should never get access to create purchase orders, because that is more secure, but that's not always realistic in terms of company size and productivity. So ours is a detective control, which is going to help you identify where the conflicts are and then mitigate those conflicts. And so before we can start to do any of that, we have to build a rule set of potential conflicts. And so that rule set is at the highest level from a business level, right, or a segregation of duties policy, is that a user shouldn't be able to create a vendor and print a check. A user shouldn't be able to create a general ledger account and then post a journal entry because that could lead to a misstatement of financials. And so if you do that at a business process level, then you need to be able to map that down to the Intacct application. And the challenge with that is that's a really time-consuming process. The good news is our team has a standard SOD policy set, and we've mapped that down to Intacct already. So that's available to you if, with the Fastpath tool, as that rule set is built, and then you can go through that rule set and make sure that it makes sense for your organization. So we might have rules out there for AR, but you're only using Intacct for AP and GL. So you can set those rules to ignore, you can delete them, you can set certain things to high, and I'll show you how to do that. But that's the first thing you need to do as an organization, is understand which rules are applicable to your organization. We have one client that's a Fortune 50 company that has 11 rules in their SOD rule set. We have another company that has over 650 rules in their SOD rule set. So there's a span, depending on your organization and what you do, where that rule set's going to come in. So once you've identified that rule set, what you want to do is identify where the conflicts are in your access. And then once you identify those conflicts, you have two options. The first is to say, hey, there's no reason that Homer Simpson needs access to create vendors. Let's revoke Homer's access, and then that eliminates the conflict. Or you can mitigate the conflict. You can say, we understand that we have access to create vendors and create checks, but we can document a mitigation. We use positive pay with the bank to mitigate that risk. And so let's look at the Fastpath tool and see how we do that, implement that methodology. So the first thing we need is a rule set. So if on the conflict listing, it brings back our rule set. There are 264 rules in our standard Intacct rule set. And for example, right here at the top, do you have access to create general ledger master data and enter a journal entry? And right now that's listed as a high risk. And so again, you can go through this listing of rules. This rule set comes standard with the license of the Fastpath tools. So if you needed to do an SOD assessment, you could be up and running by the end of the day today. It's not something that takes weeks and months to get online. You can implement the tool in a matter of hours and see your SOD risks because the rules are already in the system. And you can augment this rule set however you like. So let's say that we don't think that's a high risk, we think it's a low risk. I can go to Add Edit Conflicts, and I can update this conflict. And you can create your own rules. You can set a rule to ignore, low, medium. As I mentioned, we are working with Salesforce.com to bring that product online as well. And then we'll be able to build conflicts between Salesforce and Intacct. So I shouldn't be able to create the order in Salesforce or the customer in Salesforce and receive cash inside of Intacct for that. That's all coming. That'll be released in 2015. But here you can just change whatever you want, and if you add a new rule, the next time you run your analysis, it'll be included. So once I have my rule set, the next step is to identify where the risks are. So if I go to User Conflicts and I hit Go here, it's going to show me, it's going to compare my rule set to my end user security. So no matter how that user's inheriting that access, whether it's through a role, whether it's directly, it's going to bring that back as a risk. So here I can see that the admin, or I'll go down here to Alex, he has access to maintain general ledger master data and enter journal entries. It's identified as a risk. Now I could either go back to Intacct and change his security and revoke his access to accounts and then run my analysis again, and then that conflict wouldn't show, or I can click on the status and document what my compensating control is for that risk. Again, tie your controls to your application security so you have that balance there. You're balancing your productivity and you're balancing that risk. So all of our accounting clerks need access to do both of those things in order to get our month closed, in order to just get business done. So under mitigations, there's a drop down, and these are some standard delivered mitigations. You can add your own. You could enter a code like GL104A actually ties back to something else. But here I could say that we're using review and approve, or using some workflow. or I can go out, and if I've mitigated this in the past for another one of our accounting clerks, I can see how we've done that for another clerk. So it helps you going forward. The first time you go through it, you're going to have a lot of documentation to do, but each subsequent time, if you've added a new accounting clerk, someone got promoted to accounting clerk, you can just roll down your documentation from your other accounting clerks that we use reconciliation, monthly journal entry reconciliation, and I can save that out. So now I've documented what my compensating control is for that risk. We've recognized the risk, and we have a control in place. The last report here would be the conflict status report. What it shows you is the user conflict, and it ties it to the mitigation, and then it puts a user timestamp. So I just reviewed that at this time at 1:46 on December 18th. So it makes it very easy and very visible to see that you're updating your conflicts on an ongoing basis. So if I go back to our deck here, there are really three key questions in this methodology. What are your rules? Where are your risks? And what are you doing about those risks? So our rules are out of the box, the report of where your risks are out of the box, and then you can go through and document the mitigation for those risks, or you can go out and change the application security in Intacct, and then that risk would drop off, right? There is no, the risk is no more. But those are the three key questions. Now, Armanino, their GRC team estimates that it takes about 250 to 260 hours to do each manual segregation of duties testing. And when you implement our tool, that gets narrowed down to a matter of days instead of being weeks. And so being able to automate this, and a lot of our customers, GameStop, for example, they used to spend, they took their audit prep time from 4 weeks to less than a day using our tools. And now they're able to do their audits more frequently instead of just doing some things once a year, which would be better for risk management, right? Not only do the auditors like it better, it's better because you understand where your risks are. So again, that's the methodology we use. It's a detective methodology. The rule set's there. You can augment that rule set, and it's really going to deliver and make it very visible to where your risks are within the system. So the next piece is audit trails. So now we know that Homer has access to vendors, right? Homer has access to vendors, but I can't remember the last episode where Homer actually went to the power plant, right? He never shows up at work. So, you know, if he was using Intacct, he could use it from anywhere, right? Because it's in the cloud. So I guess he could be working from home. But the idea is that does it really matter if he has access? Did he actually use his access to do anything? And so, again, a lot of times we get a call once a week where somebody calls us and says, I need to know anytime anyone ever changes anything in Intacct. It's like, wait a minute, no, don't do that. You don't want to see changes for every single thing within the system, because what happens when you do that is you create your own haystack, right? So the high-risk things get buried under all the other things that are being tracked within the system. So what you want to do, again, is take a risk-based approach. Focus on the key areas. Go back to your business process maps. Go back to knowing thyself as a company. And if you're Heineken, it's inventory. We're going to track who can change inventory, the inventory prices. Or you might want to track vendor information or track configuration setting changes. And those are the key areas that most auditors are going to recommend. If you think back to that other slide for the key access points, typically the audit trails are the same 20 to 30, 40 places. So focus on the key areas, and then once you focus on those key areas, focus on key fields. So on a vendor, right, if you decide to track vendors, really there are only probably like 5, 10 key fields on the vendors, or maybe for your organization there's only one. So I really want to know what our payment terms are for the vendors, and if somebody's changing the payment terms, because that impacts our aging reports, right? Or I want to know if somebody's changing the dimensions for the vendors, or changing our price levels for our vendors. But what we what we don't really care about is fax number. Does that matter? Do I care what their mobile phone is? Does it matter to me if it changes from an audit perspective or risk perspective? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But again, the more things that you track, the more data you create, the harder it is to find the anomalies in the high-risk areas. So again, with audit trails, make sure that you're taking that risk-based approach. And really the key questions that you want to ask when you're doing this continuous monitoring or audit trails is, who changed the data, right? So was Homer supposed to be changing the data? Did Homer change the data for an HR field? Did Homer change the data for purchasing? Did Homer change order entry data? Is he supposed to be doing that? So is it the right person, someone from the right department? When was it changed? Was it changed during normal business hours? Did somebody come in at night and make a change? Did somebody make a change over the weekend? And that sticks out to auditors as people are making changes outside of normal business hours. That raises red flags. And then, was it changed the right way? And really what that means is, was the change made within our business rules? So if you have a business rule that says once we create an order, we never change the unit price once it goes to invoice. For example, if you see any changes on unit price at an invoice level, that's a risk. It's a red flag. You'd want to go address that with the end user. So that's kind of an ethereal concept in terms of the right way, but was data changed the way according to our business rules? So with the audit trails, Intacct has really good audit log reports natively in the tool. It is an optional package that you can install. So if you don't have it, you'd want to reach out to your partner or reach out to Intacct to talk to them about that. There are reports available natively in the tool. We're also working with Intacct to start bringing that into our platform so you can use the sign-off in those features as well. So that's something that we're looking at down the road. But again, that audit log functionality is available with that optional package. And I know the Intacct team would be happy to help you if you don't already have that set up to talk to you about getting that set up in your environment. So essentially those were the key areas. I left a little time here for any questions, comments, any questions about the lovely weather in Des Moines. I'll also put my email address up there. This is all we do is security, audit, compliance at Fastpath. So if you have any questions, whether you own our tools or not, we're more than happy to help you with those questions. So if you're going through an audit, trying to do it manually, trying to see how other users have done that, we're more than happy to help you out with that. So I'll look and see if we have any questions here, or if Trish, you want to open it up to open everybody's mic up. I don't know how to do that. So if you want to do that, we can see if there are any questions out there.
Sure thing. And in the meantime, you can raise your hand if you have questions. There we go. Everybody should be unmuted, so if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to ask them. There is one question that came in through the chat. Does IT or finance drive projects like this?
Sorry, could you say that again, Trish? I couldn't catch the second half.
Sorry, does IT or finance drive projects like this?
Does IT or audit or IT or finance drive projects like this?
Yeah.
Ideally, it would be both, that you would partner together to work on these projects. Now, that's ideally. What we typically see at most clients, it's whoever ends up owning the relationship with the auditor. So ERP systems kind of fall into a strange place just based on the question that was asked, right? An ERP is an IT system, but it's really a finance thing. So you kind of get that Three Stooges, where did he go thing going on, where it's like, hey, it's not my job, hey, it's not your job. And so a lot of times it ends up being whoever the auditor talks to. Now, many times that might be the controller, so it ends up in the finance department. And we don't see it as much being an IT function. Or if you have an Intacct administrator, a lot of times it will fall on that. So it's either the CFO, the controller, or the Intacct administrator. If it was me managing the project, I would try to have a co-managed project to make sure the Intacct administrator and someone for the finance team were both working on it together. And really what our tools are designed to do is empower the finance team to go and get that data and interpret and understand that data to do the reviews. So the business process owner should be doing those reviews, but in the end, it's the IT administrator that might end up communicating with the auditor, depending on who the auditors wanted to talk to. But that's really typically what we see. So the awesome auditing consulting answer is it all depends, but it kind of does. A lot of times it's whoever knows Intacct the best. So if you have one specific user that knows Intacct, if your controller knows it, is an expert in it beyond anybody on the IT team, that's probably the person that's best suited for it. Or conversely, if you have somebody that's an expert in Intacct from the IT team, that might be the best person to lead that. So does that answer the question?
He said yes. The next question is, will this eliminate the need of IT department to be the administrator for Intacct?
Was that a hopeful question? So the question was, will this eliminate the need for IT administrators to control security in Intacct?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and I got the spirit of it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So the spirit of the question is, that's an organizational decision. A lot of times what we find is that the business process owners start to better understand how Intacct security works and can better start to own that. But there is some idea that you may want the users, the IT team involved, because it gives you a little bit of segregation of duties with that. There are other times where you say, if it were up to us, the IT team wouldn't have any involvement in the finance application. You're going to start to learn more. So I don't know that it necessarily eliminates them, but it starts to empower and better help the finance team to understand that. But it might be a stretch to say that you don't need the IT team in there at all, but you can start to limit some of the things that they're doing there. So again, it helps, but it's not going to be that silver bullet that says, okay, we can get, and I'm sure for many IT people, they're like, great, if I don't have to do that, that's one less thing I have to do, right? But it's not always that easy, but it starts to move in that direction.
Great. And then the last one says, we don't have many of these controls in place. Should we try to implement these ideas all at once or start with high-risk areas first based on the level of effort required to implement more controls?
So you don't have many of the controls built in place, and kind of where do we start? I wouldn't start with the easiest. I would start with the highest risk. And sometimes the processes that are the highest risk are the hardest ones to do. So what we've seen some other companies do is maybe start with an easy one, so you kind of get your feet wet in terms of how it's going to work, and then move on to the highest risk. So to me, if you take something simple like creating a customer, creating a vendor, and map it out, and then you take on the returns the RMA process, right? You take on returns, which is a very complex process because you're having to return cash, do all sorts of different things, handle product. Start off with something very simple that you can get through, so you kind of understand how to build the business process map, start to build those, really understand the process not the business process, but the process of building controls. But then very quickly I'd move on to the highest risk areas. So that would be my approach.
Great. And I don't think we have any other questions.
Well, great. Well, I really appreciate the questions and the time today. If you have any other questions about Fastpath or about Intacct or any of the other things we mentioned today, please let us know. We did record the session, so if any of your colleagues would like that, we'll push that out, and we'll also push out the deck if you would like to see a copy of the slide deck. Trish, was there anything else I missed before we say so long?
Nope. Thanks, everybody, for attending.